Midnight Visitor. Emily lived alone in a quiet neighborhood in London. After a long and exhausting day at work, she returned home, had her dinner, and watched some TV before heading to bed. That night, she noticed how heavy the air felt. There was no breeze outside, everything was silent, but something inside felt disturbingly different. When she woke up in the morning, she found the window wide open, but she was certain she had closed it the night before. Trying to convince herself otherwise, she thought, "Maybe I forgot," and continued with her day. Yet by noon, a strange feeling started creeping over her, a sense that she wasn't alone in the house. The next night, she went to bed at the same time. This time, she carefully checked the window and made sure it was securely shut. However, in the middle of the night, she suddenly woke up to a faint noise. Something was at the foot of her bed. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she saw a silhouette. It was a black cat. A cold chill ran down Emily's spine. How did this cat get inside? For a few minutes, they stared at each other. The cat's eyes glowed eerily in the night. After a moment of hesitation, Emily turned on the light, but the room was empty. The cat had vanished. Once again, the window was wide open. She tried not to panic, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. She didn't sleep at all that night. In the morning, she searched every corner of the house, but there was no trace of the cat. The same thing happened night after night. At the same hour, the black cat would appear, stare at Emily for a few minutes, and then disappear. Every morning, the window was open again, no matter how carefully she locked it. One night, she decided she wouldn't sleep at all. She stayed up until the early hours of the morning. But that night, the cat didn't return. When Emily finally got out of bed, she walked over to the window and froze. There in the dirt just outside were the faint traces of the cat's paw prints, as if made from ash. But this time, the tracks didn't lead outside. They led inside, straight into her home.
The shepherd's dark secret. One evening, in a remote mountain village, a shepherd named Thomas took his sheep to graze deep within the forest. As the sun set, the sky turned shades of orange and red. Thomas, as usual, spread his sheep across a wide area, planning to prepare his evening meal. In the forest, while keeping his sheep together, Thomas noticed the remains of an old stone structure as darkness began to fall. The structure was completely covered in moss and ivy. Thomas thought it had been abandoned for a long time and continued grazing the sheep in the area. As night fell, the darkness around Thomas deepened within the forest. The stars in the sky were barely visible. Suddenly, the sheep became restless, and a scream echoed from the depths of the forest. Thomas decided to follow the scream and approached the stone structure. The sound seemed to be getting closer. When he entered the structure, he felt a sudden chill and noticed that an ancient tomb had been opened. Inside the structure, there was an old stone sarcophagus, and around it, dark candles had burned out. On top of the sarcophagus was an old, dusty book wrapped in an ancient garment. When Thomas opened the book, he saw it contained strange symbols and writings that suggested an ancient curse. At that moment, a thin wind began to rise from the sarcophagus, and an old perfume scent filled the air. Thomas noticed strange movements in the dark corners of the structure. Shadowy figures seemed to be emerging and approaching him. Thomas, gripped by fear, tried to back away but found it difficult to find the exit. The silence from the sarcophagus was suddenly broken by whispering voices. The whispers seemed to repeat the words of a cursed spell. The sheep began to panic and scatter, and Thomas, running after them through the darkness, saw shadowy figures closing in from the corners of the structure. The dark figures gradually surrounded Thomas. In a burst of courage, Thomas managed to gather his sheep and quickly left the forest. The shadowy figures and whispering voices seemed to vanish into the depths of the forest. By morning, when Thomas returned to the village, the sheep appeared normal, but the location of the stone structure had vanished without a trace. Thomas could never tell anyone about the terrifying events of that night, but the fear he experienced in the forest remained with him for the rest of his life.
One night, under a severe storm and heavy rain, a man named Mark was driving an old car along a forest road. Lightning illuminated the sky, while wind and rain pounded against the car's windows. Mark felt the difficulty of navigating through these harsh weather conditions. Suddenly, the engine failed, and the car came to a stop in the middle of the road. Mark immediately grabbed his flashlight and considered stepping outside, but the intensity of the rain and the storm blurred everything. His phone also had no signal. Mark decided to stay inside the car and watch through the closed windows. Besides the sound of the storm and the rain hitting the windows, there was an unsettling silence. Suddenly, the car's lights began to flicker and then went out completely. In the pitch-dark interior, Mark could only see the dark silhouettes of the car's contents for a few seconds during the lightning flashes. In those flashes, he noticed strange movements around the car. Several shadowy figures seemed to be moving around the vehicle. Panic-stricken, Mark searched for his flashlight but struggled to find it. At that moment, he heard a rustling and whispering sound inside the car. It felt as if someone was whispering to him from the back seat. After a while, an indistinct face appeared on the back window. The face was transparent and pale, as if formed by the raindrops. Though Mark couldn't see the face clearly, he felt a surge of fear. The face seemed to have left marks on the glass. Then the sounds inside the car intensified. The noises of doors slowly opening, seats moving, and the engine's rumble made Mark's heart race. The temperature inside the car suddenly dropped, and Mark felt a cold draft. Suddenly, the car doors locked by themselves, and Mark was trapped inside. Handprints began to appear on the windows, as if fingers were trying to reach inside. Mark quickly wiped the windows, but nothing became clear. The sounds inside grew increasingly terrifying. In one corner of the seat, a vague figure's silhouette could be seen, as if it was reaching out towards him. Finally, Mark mustered his courage, pulled the door handle, and it opened. When he stepped outside, he found nothing around the car despite the storm and rain. The shadows and faces seemed to have vanished into the storm. Mark hurried back to his car and managed to start it. As he drove through the forest, he felt that the dark figures and whispering voices were still with him. By morning, the storm had subsided, but the mysterious occurrences and frightening figures around the car remained an unsettling question in Mark's mind. Which story did you find the scariest? Let us know in the comments which story you liked the most and share your own scary experiences. Maybe we'll feature your story in one of our upcoming videos.